Dr Jean Redpath is a senior researcher for Africa Criminal Justice Reform at the Dullah Omar Institute. Dr Redpath, good afternoon to you and thank you for your time. We've seen so many contract killings in KwaZulu-Natal, and of course this happened in Durban. I had to wonder if it was significant that this actually happened in Durban when we've had so many of these killings in that particular province.
Yes, KwaZulu-Natal is a province that particularly struggles with political killings. But the contract killings are common all over South Africa, unfortunately. Perhaps because KwaZulu-Natal is one of the more populous provinces, we hear of more incidents coming from KwaZulu-Natal. And KwaZulu-Natal certainly does have, at the moment, a serious problem with violence in general, and particularly organized crime, violence associated with organized crime, which seems to have peaked around 2022 and is perhaps arguably stabling off at the moment.
This idea that, you can go into certain places and find a hitman, or if you know someone who maybe knows someone, you can resolve a dispute using violence. Now, we all have sort of rose-tinted spectacles of the past, but surely we've seen in the last 20 years the rise of the sort of hitman industry, an industry of Nkabi.
Well, I think, it's difficult to get hard data on whether it's more prevalent now than it was before. If we think of Tilly Peterson back in 2006, it was, and various other incidences over the last 20 years, it's difficult to know if it's more common or less common. What we do know is that impunity for serious violent crime has increased, and we know that from the data, that we know that a ever-reducing percentage of crimes like murder, like aggravated robbery, actually end up, are matched by conviction in court. And that certainly will encourage more such activity, because people arguably are correct in thinking that they will get away with it.
Well, in this case, it took over a year, and I know plenty of people have made this point in the last sort of 13, 15 hours, that if it wasn't such a high-profile case, we're not really sure if the police would have made arrests at all.
Yes, and I think what is notable is that all of the suspects, or I think at least 4 of them, were actually held on other charges, including murder, which tells you that these people are involved in serious criminality on an ongoing basis, and perhaps if they hadn't been involved in this case, would have continued to be so involved in such cases, which tells you that they've been getting away with it for some time.
There are other aspects to all of this, and we've now had these arrests, and often, and I hate to say this, but often we'll have arrests in a high-profile case, and then perhaps a little more quieter than the arrests, the people are released or they appear in court and a judge says there isn't enough evidence or there's some kind of technical problem. You've mentioned the fact that there's a sense of impunity. I presume it's not just the police, it's with the prosecuting authorities as well.
Yes, and I think, that's a very damaging tendency that has arisen over the last 10 or 15 years of the prosecuting authority keeping the bar very high on cases that they choose to actually prosecute. And so one of the tests is the reasonable prospects for success to prosecute a case, and they tend to only take cases that have got a very high probability of success, which is 90% plus, because we see that in the data. And so what that means is cases which might have had a 70% or a 65% chance of success are not prosecuted. Now, arguably, this is in order to preserve resources and to use the resources on the most successful cases. But there really needs to be a shift of the focus to looking at high-impact cases, looking at cases that will really undermine trust in the criminal justice system if they are not prosecuted. And that's just one side of the story, is the failure to prosecute in the first place. The other side of the story is the failure to secure convictions. One of the most famous cases, the Shrindwani matter, where the judge even said that there was no case to answer. The case was not handled appropriately. And so, for many people who are engaged in a life of crime, the potential penalty is irrelevant because they don't think they're going to get caught.
We've seen this play out more recently, and this case is still live, the Sinzumio murder, where the NPA made some, it seems at this stage, I mean, they may be vindicated later, let me just stress that. They seem to have made some strange decisions about who to prosecute and who not to prosecute. Is there any evidence at all that the NPA is sort of improving in what it's doing, that it's actually getting better at these cases? Because even if in high-profile cases people can sort of get away with it, I think many people just feel, well, then there's no point using the justice system at all.
So one has to look at two different things here. One is that the length of time it takes for cases to come to fruition. And unfortunately, that is getting longer and longer. And that's not only up to the NPA. That relates to court management. It relates to the availability of lawyers on either side. It relates to all sorts of matters, including the investigation by the police. But what is very clear is that things are taking longer than they did before, which in turn means that each year there are fewer convictions. So even if the success is getting higher, it doesn't look that way because each year fewer and fewer matters are making it through because it's taking longer for them to get through the system.
Where do we start with reform of all of this, Dr. Redpath? I mean, obviously the police, we need them to be more effective, to be quicker. We need the NPA to be more effective, to be quicker too. I don't know. I mean, we've been talking about the criminal justice system for years and years and years. And I think people have given up hope that it can ever be reformed. Are there places where we could make some kind of reform and get some kind of results, say, in the next 5 years?
Yes, I suppose one is very disillusioned. I mean, as we speak, there's a conference on the integrated criminal justice system, which, you know, we had such conferences in 2005 and 2003 and 2008. And that integration is where the problem lies. If you look at the data, you can see where the drop-offs happen. The drop-offs in throughput through the system happen in the transfer from the case from the police to the prosecuting authority, and from the prosecuting authority to actually getting through the court system at the end. And so it's at those intersections of the different parts of the criminal justice system that we see the drop-off. And that closely relates to the performance indicators that are applied. So, for example, the police are judged on the dockets that they send, not the dockets that the NPA chooses to prosecute. The NPA, in turn, is judged on the success in the dockets it chooses to prosecute, not on the dockets that it didn't take up and chose not to prosecute. And so these incentives work to actually reduce the throughput through the system. And this is a serious problem which researchers have been raising for many years, but it seems not to have been taken on board, that there needs to be performance indicators which bring the system together rather than encouraging people to just do their own jobs, which then don't feed through the system and which actually have perverse incentives. It's a perverse incentive for the NPA to say you must succeed only on the cases which you choose to prosecute. Well, then you're not going to prosecute the difficult cases, and that's the bottom line.
Dr. Jean Redpath, thank you. Senior Researcher at the African Criminal Justice Reform at the Dullah Omar Institute. Do appreciate the time.